I want to begin with a very warm congratulations to Sri Lanka. Your original name was Sarandeep, from which grew serendipity. And you have made Sarandeep the island of future prosperity by taking this very, very enlightened decision to make Sri Lanka 100% organic and chemical free. I have worked with many states of India, 7 of them, but the state that actually wrote laws and policies to make itself the first state in India to be organic is the state of Sikkim. And they are more prosperous for that reason. But I want to add to it that you haven't arrived at this out of the blue. You have arrived at it over decades of work and the recognition that pesticides cause harm, that high-cost agriculture with external inputs creates debt, distress, suicides. So I want to also congratulate you for your Control of Pesticides Act, for your national policy of prevention of suicide, which has reduced suicide by 70%. I have worked both on the tragedy of pesticides since the Bhopal disaster. In fact, it was the tragedy of Punjab and the tragedy of Bhopal in '84 that led me to focus on agriculture. I'm basically trained in quantum theory. This was not my chosen field of study. I dedicated myself to this because of the harm. And thousands of people died in Bhopal. Thousands are dying in Punjab. There's a cancer train that leaves Punjab, which is the land where the first Green Revolution was implemented. And I want to congratulate you because your Agriculture Ministry and Health Ministry worked together to make the acts. You did the leading work on Roundup and the chronic kidney disease. And I remember facilitating the evidence from Sri Lanka at the Monsanto Tribunal that we organized with many, many, many other organizations to bring evidence of harm of all the toxic chemicals that are being sold. I want to add that it is not fair that your beautiful island should have to suffer that ship disaster near Colombo. And ironically, it's like a message. What is it carrying? It's carrying nitric oxide, which is used to make both synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and explosives. Let's remember Beirut 2 years ago, the explosion that took place that killed 200 people. It's not an accident that these chemicals are causing so much harm because they were designed to cause harm. Albert Howard was a Britisher who was sent to improve our agriculture in 1905. And of course, at that time, we were all one British Empire. But Albert Howard was a good scientist. So he arrives in Pusa, where the first agriculture university was to be set up. And he found the fields were fertile. He found lots of insects, but no pest damage. And he wrote a book called The Agricultural Testament. We've reprinted it. And I will be so happy to make sure that all the work we've done for now 36 years on agriculture is made available for your transition. But when Albert Howard said, I will make the pest and the peasant my professor, and he wrote the Agricultural Testament, this is what he writes. Artificial manures are widely used in the West, he's talking about, because we didn't at that time. The feature of manuring of the West is the use of artificial manures. The factories engaged during the Great War in the fixation of atmospheric nitrogen for the manufacture of explosives had to find other markets. The use of nitrogenous fertilizers in agriculture increased. Until today, the majority of farmers and market gardeners base their manurial program on the cheapest forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium on the market. What may be convenient called as the NPK mentality dominates farming alike in the experimental stations and the countryside. Vested interests entrenched in time of national emergency have gained a stranglehold. But they have now created an existential emergency for the planet. There's so many reports now coming out about how the fertilizers are destroying the soil, destroying the oceans, destroying the climate. Every year, right now, we are contributing 1.36 tons of greenhouse gases from nitrogen fertilizer, nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more damaging to the climate. It's usually not talked about, but if you look at the violation of planetary boundaries, you will see that the most violated boundaries are the biodiversity boundary and the nitrogen boundary. And this is because we are using all of these heavy, intensive chemical fertilizers. This is the map that the Stockholm Resilience Institute has developed on the planetary boundaries. The red zones are the real danger zones. This is the biodiversity extinction, which is because of chemicals that kill biodiversity. And this is the nitrogen rupture of the climate. But it isn't just the climate that is being damaged. Only 20% of these fertilizers are taken up by plants, 80% run off. And the runoff is into the oceans, into our waterways, causing nitrate pollution. There are dead zones everywhere. And you're a beautiful island surrounded by the sea. And that nitrogen fertilizer killing your fisheries, killing your coral reefs, will affect both the fisheries livelihood and your tourism livelihood. These are very important externalities that must be taken into account. 450 new coastal dead zones have been created. I've just done a foreword to a book on the dead zones and the destruction of coastal ecosystems. The oxygen is disappearing. It's going to be less, between 2.5 to 7% down. We are not just killing the land, we are killing the oceans. And are we creating more fertility? No, we are not. First of all, I have called in my book, when I wrote my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution in '84 for the United Nations University, because of the tragedy of Punjab. And I said, this was supposed to be about prosperity. But the Green Revolution in Punjab brought Norman Borlaug the Nobel Peace Prize. But we are seeing more, 30,000 people had been killed in that period of violence in Punjab. And I wanted to go to the roots of it. And the United Nations University gave me the permission. And so I wrote the book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And I found then that actually these chemicals are ecological narcotics. Now, like any narcotic, the more you use, the more you must use. They're addictive because they kill the ecosystem, which actually supports the ecological function. So when nitrogen fertilizers kill the soil, you must use more and more. Let me just give you some data from India. Fertilizer response has dramatically reduced. Sharma and Sharma have done a study showing that the fertilizer response over the last 30 years has dropped from 13.4 per kilogram of nutrient in 1970 to 3.7 kilogram. So the illusion that applying fertilizers will keep increasing quantity to is not working anymore because it is killing the soil itself. So a few years ago, 10 years studies and then 20-year studies of our soils with the leading soil ecologist of India. And he was from a government institute. Even he was so surprised because he's been doing this work with us over decades. And this is the 20-year study for Doon Valley, our valley in the Himalaya, in the foothills of the Himalaya, where we've started the Beach Vidyapeeth, the Earth University, biodiversity conservation farm, for research, for teaching, for training. And I look forward to working with you on this transition. We've made this transition over 36 years, and we want to make all of our learning and all of our research available to you. In October, we do a 1-month course on return to the earth, because chemicals made us forget we are part of the earth. Chemicals made us think that fossil fuels will see us through life. 600 million years of the earth's work in fossilization started to get burnt. And all chemicals in agriculture are based on fossil fuels. So we got alienated from the earth and then are now causing all the damage. As I've written in many, many of my writings recently, even the COVID and the pandemics are a result of a greedy agribusiness model that has to invade and invade and invade into every ecosystem. It's the invasions into the forest, according to the UN, that have led to the emergence of new epidemics, the Ebolas in the western Ghats of India, the Koduga, the monkey disease, the HIV, the H1N1, MERS, Zika, SARS. Of course, the story of this particular corona is more complicated, especially now with the entry of the gain of function research. But either way, it is about arrogance, refusal to recognize planetary boundaries, ecological limits, and the rights of people. This arrogance is not only leading to the new diseases, it has caused a lot of harm to life on Earth and biodiversity, and is causing a lot of harm to people. The soil itself is a living system. It's a living organism, as the Earth is a living organism. She is called Gaia. James Lovelock, a NASA scientist, when he realized she manages her own temperature, she created the monsoons. But when there's climate change, there's a rupture. I call climate change the metabolic disease of the planet, just like diabetes is a metabolic disease of human beings when we destroy our health systems. Today, we don't know when the monsoon will come. We don't know when a cyclone will come. We've just had a cyclone Totke on the west coast and a cyclone Yas on the east coast. And these cyclones are causing so much damage to our agriculture. A stable climate is a right. It's a right of the earth, and a stable climate is a right for all agriculture. So how have we healed the soil with organic farming? Let me just run through some data for you. The organic matter on our farms, we did a survey of 200 farms, organic and chemical. On the organic farms, the organic matter is up to 99% higher than 20 years ago. On the chemical farms, it's down 14%. Now that's understandable. When you don't give organic matter, you're going to have less organic. But nitrogen is the puzzling factor for scientists who are taught to think you put nitrogen, you'll have more nitrogen. No, nitrogen in the soil has gone down 22% in chemical farms fed with urea, made from the nitric acid that is leaking in your coast. And nitrogen is up 100% on our farms because soil organisms make nitrogen. Earthworms increase nitrogen 5-fold. In organic soils, the organisms are making the nitrogen. They are our fertilizer factories. And when we kill them with nitrogen fertilizer, we are killing the capacity of the soil to make its nitrogen. But the soil isn't just making carbon and nitrogen. The soil is making every element of the periodic table. Our phosphorus has increased 63%. Potassium, remember NPK? K is up 84%. You don't need an external input, and it's down 22% in the chemical farms. But a lot of deficiencies that are leading to vulnerability and immunity collapse, like zinc, which also public health specialist in Australia, when they visited us, when they saw our research, they said, now we understand why half of the teenage population of Australia is suffering from depression, because they do brain chemistry and they found zinc deficiency in the brain. But if there's zinc deficiency in the soil, there'll be zinc deficiency in the plants, there'll be zinc deficiency in the food you eat, and then there'll be zinc deficiencies in our body, leading to depression. The zinc is down 37% in chemical farms in our valley, and it is up 14%. When we grow organic food, we are growing health, we are growing nutrition. We are not just growing a commodity. Manganese, which has been identified for attention deficit disorder, the deficiency of manganese, 17% less. So we are literally creating systems for creating disease, not just epidemics, but all kinds of chronic disease. Iron is down 12%. All the troubling deficiencies can be rooted down to the soil, to the plants we grow, and the way we grow. So I say health is biodiversity from the soil to our plants, to our gut microbiome. Our gut microbiome is not just an empty container. Our gut microbiome is 100 trillion organisms that are seeking healthy, good food. When you apply chemicals, it's like a bombardment. Our gut becomes a war zone. And then we have all kinds of syndromes. In America, they're having leaky gut syndrome. They've bombarded the poor gut so much with toxics that children are having leaky gut with which they can die. Our work has shown that across the board, when you do organic, and then you measure not the yield, I'm so happy that Dr. Prasad talked about the shift from quantity to quality. But quality is the right quantity of diverse nutrients. So we have more energy, we have more protein, we have more carotene, we have more folic acid, we have more iron per acre. And I realized when I was doing the Green Revolution study that measuring yield is not an accurate measure, because yield per acre merely measures what will leave the farm, what will leave Sri Lanka. It doesn't measure what happens to the land of Sri Lanka. It doesn't measure what happens to the ocean. It doesn't measure what happens to the biodiversity. It doesn't measure whether the farmer was left in debt and committed suicide. And it definitely doesn't measure the quality of the food. The quality of the food is systematically declining. Let me just share with you some data. So across the board, this is US data, calcium is down 29%, magnesium down 21%, potassium down 6%, phosphorus down 11%. And we did a meta-analysis of many studies. In organic, the vitamin C is higher, 27%, iron is higher, 21%, magnesium is higher, 29%, phosphorus is higher, 13%. The only thing that's less is nitrate, which is a contaminant, and it causes disease. A meta study done in the UK and published in the British Journal of Nutrition, which looked at 400 studies, most organic products were 60% more beneficial nutrients than chemicals. So measuring the weight, the yield is not enough. Measuring the nutrition, the quality is the right measure. So we shifted, and I first did the biodiversity productivity, and then I did a study on health per acre and organic solutions to hunger and malnutrition. And these studies show in different ecosystems, the spice gardens of the Western Ghats, like your spice gardens in Sri Lanka, the terrace fields in our Himalaya, the dryland Deccan, the desert of Rajasthan, and it doesn't matter where, two principles are across the board. The more biodiverse your system, the more it produces and the more resilient it is. The second, the more biodiverse your economies. The farmer must be fed, your local economy must be fed, your national economy must be fed, and of course, high value products must be exported. That the more diversity of options there are, the better off the people are. We can feed 2 times India's population. Just today, there's a very tragic news item of what a large percent of Indian children are malnourished. But that's because we have designed an agriculture for extraction, not for nourishment of the earth and not for nourishment of the people. Now and when I'm talking of South Asia, we are blessed with such amazing climate. When Babar came as the first Mughal, he said, diversity is the recognition of this part of the world. Everything is diverse. The languages are diverse. The plants are diverse. The foods are diverse. The people are diverse. That diversity is what made us rich. That diversity is what made us the center of the world economy. Till the Europeans said, oh my gosh, we should have a share in that wealth. So Columbus came also to India, but he found land in the middle and then he discovered America. Vasco da Gama came, landed in Calicut for the spices. And spices from our lands were being exported in the times of the Greeks, in the times of the early Romans. The records are all there. Our spice gardens have stood the test of time for thousands of years. East India Company was created for the spices and textiles of our region. And within a short few hundred years, they devastated us. They created famines. 40 to 60 million people died in India for famines, and 45 trillion was transferred. So the addiction to chemical inputs is like the new Lagan, I call it. Lagan was the British just scared. All the land is theirs and they'll take rents from the peasants. That is what caused the famine, but also led to the wealth transfer. But basically, in effect, when 4 companies control 60% of the seed and the same companies sell us chemicals, are they going to sell us seed that don't need chemicals, or are they going to sell us seed that need more chemicals? Of course, they're going to do genetic engineering of seed for more Roundup, more pesticides. And this is why your decision to go 100% organic is central to the future prosperity of the Sri Lankan farmers and Sri Lanka as an amazing country that has stood its ground for centuries. The nitrogen fertilizers don't just stop their damage with the nitrogen fertilizer itself. The damage continues because nitrogen fertilizers use 10 times more water and they make the plant much more vulnerable to pests. They make the cell walls weak, so more pests can attack. And in my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, I covered all the studies of that time that showed that chemical fertilizers actually create more pests. The studies showed how by making the plant more weak, infestation of leaf folder increased from 13 to 43 damaged leaves per hill, with an increase of nitrogen from 0 to 150 kilograms. And that goes for all pests. Chabuso is brilliant French scientist. And he did a lot of work on the correlation between chemical fertilizers and pests. And the reduction of the genetic base from which new varieties are developed also contributes to pest vulnerability. A limited or shrinking gene pool faces pests which continue to adapt through mutation, a process increased by pesticide use. Pest resistance is an ecological state. Plants have intelligence, they release chemicals. And then the chemicals protect other leaves, other plants. Thesis after thesis are coming out on the intelligence of plants who generate their own pest control mechanisms. As Chabuso comments, the gene, the vector of hereditary, can only operate as a function of the environment. It's now being called epigenetics. Thus, it is useless improving the resistance of a plant to such and such a disease if genetic uniformity is creating more vulnerability. My work on these issues has taught me that as you destroy the biodiversity of fields, you actually create pests. And as you use more pesticides, you create pests. As you use more fertilizer, you create pests. So I have identified 5 reasons that are creating more pest problems in agriculture. I have learned over these many years that good farming and nature does not have a pest, it has insects. Good farming and nature does not have weeds, it has plant biodiversity. It is chemical agriculture that turns insects as enemies and then sprays and creates the pest. Sprays Roundup and creates the weeds and super weeds, as we see in the American farmlands. Half the farmlands of America are overtaken by super weeds that are resistant to Roundup. There are 125,000 cases filed in the courts of America after Eric Cerulini in France and then the WHO, the International Agency on Research in Cancer, showed that this was a probable carcinogen. And you, of course, made the links in Sri Lanka between the kidney failure and the kidney disease and Roundup, because it's a multi-organ failure. Now they're using dicamba, which is leading to drift, and there are cases on dicamba where neighbors are losing their peach crops. So the 5 processes by which monocultures and pesticides create pests are: first, the promotion of monoculture. Now, when you have different insects, they need different food. So when you have different foods, you will have an amazing multiplicity of insect diversity. The plants have their own way of protecting themselves, but then insects have amazing pest-predator balance in the field. And through that, they keep a balance so that no one insect becomes a pest. But now, if you give a feast to one insect, it is going to be a pest. So monocultures create pests. Chemical fertilizers of crop make plants more vulnerable to pests. Third, emergence of resistance in pests by spraying pesticides. Part of the arrogance of the chemical paradigm, it is built on the European paradigm that the earth is dead. It was created in the 16th, 17th century, largely to colonize, They needed a worldview that said, people of the third world are inferior, we don't know, and nature is dead. Terra madre to terra nullius. Well, the dead nature means you don't look at nature. And dead nature means you constantly deny that not only do biodiverse systems have their pest control mechanisms, you also deny the fact that if you spray weeds too much with weedicide, they have the intelligence to evolve resilience and resistance. If you spray too much pesticides, you're going to have resistant pests, which is why farmers have to use more and more pesticides to keep controlling. So emergence of resistance in pests by spraying pesticides, killing of friendly species, which control pests and disrupt the pest-predator balance. There is so much research coming out now, how the friendly species, when we grow weeds, we look for the ladybird beetle, the lovely red ladybird beetle, brilliant pest control. You can watch it eating the aphids. When you spray pesticides, the poor beetle itself is dying. The friendly insects are dying, and so your pests and super pests get stronger. And then they had said, in the future, we will not need pesticides at all because we'll do genetic engineering of plants and put the pesticide into the plants. I have tragically had to look at this issue. From the beginning, I was part of I was advising my government and other governments for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was signed at the Earth Summit in 1992. And then because I was the only one talking of genetic engineering at that time, the UN asked me to be part of the framing of the convention protocol on biosafety. It's called the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So I was part of this group. And I mean, I've witnessed throughout all that time, not just in the negotiations, the power of, I call them the poison cartel. They call themselves crop life. And I smile and say, they're not crop life because they don't know a crop and they know nothing about life. And I know they will bring pressure on your government in every way. They even brought pressure on President Obama when poor Michelle Obama grew an organic garden in the White House. And then Crop Life wrote to President Obama and said, ruin, stop this thing. It brings bad reputation to us. Poor Michelle was saying nothing about the pesticide industry. She was just doing a garden for the kids so they could come and enjoy being part of growing food. So I wish you all strength, and I'm there to work with you. I have survived this garden for 4 decades. So I have experience on resilience against the poison cartel, which comes as crop life. So they brought the GMO BT cotton in Vidarbha, and this was started. They brought it illegally. I sued them in the Supreme Court of India. They were stopped from selling. They got an approval only after 4 years. After 2002, they brought it illegally in 98. But we knew that when you put a toxic into the plant and every part of the plant is releasing a toxin, the plant is weak in creating its own resistance against other bugs. So what we have is what they call non-target pests attacking cotton. The armyworm, the aphids, the bollworms have emerged as resistant. The pink bollworm is now so resistant that 3 years ago I had to fly down in an emergency to Vidarbha because 130 farmers had died of pesticide poisoning. But 400,000 farmers have died of deliberate pesticide poisoning because of debt for the chemicals and seeds. So for me, your law on prevention of suicides is very, very important. But your law on making organic Sri Lanka is the law to prevent harm of suicides to human beings, but the harm to the insect diversity and to the plant diversity. BT cotton hasn't worked. Every agency, the Cotton Research Institute, all the scientists of the world, if you want that literature, I'm more than happy to forward it to you. Every year we've been writing an annual report of update on the suicides. We call it Seeds of Suicide. But I'm never satisfied just naming a problem. The reason I'm in agriculture is because I said we must find a solution. We must find the right way to do things. And therefore, we created Navdanya. That's why we practice an ecological, regenerative organic farming. And the results now are there, not just in India, from across the world. In Vidarbha, the farmers who are not growing BT cotton are earning 10 times more. We're working with widows. They have brought back their crop diversity. All their linseeds, and which are the vital oil seed for them, had been driven out by BT cotton. Their local spinning weaving had been driven out. So we grow organic cotton. We work with the Khadi ashrams. We do the spinning and weaving. We call it Fibers of Freedom. And the women have created collectives to make their own flour mills with organic flour, to make their own oils, because the internationally traded oils are very harmful to health. They're not edible oils. I know this because in 1998, the GMO soya oil was dumped on us and our own oils were made illegal. And it's the women from the slums who called me and said, bring us mustard oil back. It's the farmers of Kerala who called me and said, bring our coconut back. And I worked. And then I did a satyagraha because I'm so deeply inspired by Gandhi. I said, our oils are healthier for us. Your GMO oil, created through solvent extraction at 400 degrees with extraction of oil from a non-oil seed. Soya bean, you can't squeeze the oil. Just like, in coconut, you can squeeze the oil out. In soya bean, you need a solvent extraction. Hexane is used, which is a neurologically damaging chemical. So these are toxic. And now we get so much illnesses because of the refined oil. Even in the villages, people are waking up in India to the need to eat good oil. And the more accessible it is, the more this economy will grow. Yes, of course, your export crops should get higher quality. But I've always said this for India. I was on the National Board of Organic Farming, and I always said, why do you always talk only about Europeans eating chemical-free food? Why should Indians eat poisoned food? Every Sri Lankan, every Indian, every child has a right to chemical-free, healthy, nutritious, biodiverse, rich food. And the biodiversity itself is where nutrition comes from. You know, we know that indigenous crops have been very, very nutritionally diverse, our millets, your spices, everything. But new research has just been done in Kerala, and I would call on the Sri Lankan government to do this kind of research. Kerala did the comparison of 13 traditional varieties compared it to 2 Green Revolution varieties. And they found across the board, the traditional varieties, which are called low yielding, are higher yielding in protein, zinc, magnesium, potassium, calcium, iron. So which yield are you looking at? Not the weight, but the nutrition. Not yield per acre, but nutrition per acre. So when your soil is rich in nutrition, you have more nutrition in your plants. When you have more plant biodiversity, you have more nutrition per acre. When your seeds are bred for nutrition, you have more nutrition. This threefold amplification of the economy of our food and farming is what we knew. That's why we were the best in farming. The spice gardens is the highest you can reach in scientific brilliance. 4-dimensional farming, I call it. 4-dimensional because it is 3-dimensional. Yeah, you've got the tall trees, then you've got the vines, you've got the spice gardens, and look at the nutrition and medicinal value they produce. But why do I call them 4-dimensional? Because the 4th dimension is time. Time is sustainability. Something that has stood 5,000 years has passed the highest test of sustainability. And I've been pleading with our governments in Kerala. The other day I was talking to the ministers, and I said, declare the spice gardens our heritage. I work with Mexico, and you must join hands with Mexico, which has banned glyphosate and banned GMOs, and has defined corn as their national heritage. They said any harm that comes to this national heritage will not be allowed. So I was briefing them on World Biodiversity Day. Our spices are our national heritage, our regional heritage, and we ignore them. And because I've helped farmers do both production and distribution, it's so difficult to get spices because all the good spices are all going to Germany. I know the traders who take it all. So, but we need to make sure that we are not deprived of our Ayurveda. We are not deprived of our biodiversity and health. Come back to the issue of pesticides. First of all, insects are our friends. They are not our enemies. We have measured and measured and measured the friendly insects on the Navdanya farm. And we have 120 species of friendly insects that are doing the work of pest control. We have 6 times more pollinators. We've done research that is showing that when you have organic farms, the pollinators are able to pollinate. When you have chemical farms, the pollinators die. Our research shows that 1/3 of the production comes from pollinators. We did this with pulse crops, and we did bagging of some of the pods which could not be pollinated. They had only 2/3 of the production of the open pollinated pods, which were created by the bees. So I always say, agriculture needs to now be seen as an ecological activity where we are not the masters. We are working with the bees and pollinators. We are working with the earthworms and the soil mycorrhizae. We are working with the intelligence of our civilization. We are an ecological civilization. And we are working with our scientists who, when they're allowed to work independently, find exactly what we knew in indigenous knowledge, that biodiversity produces more, biodiversity is pest control, biodiversity is climate control, biodiversity is higher productivity, and more nutrition. We have done the work not just on the farm, but I'm part of the founding of an international group called Regeneration International. And now it's hundreds and thousands of members across the world. We have realized that soil is the solution to climate change. Biodiversity is the solution to climate change. I wrote a book for the lead up to the Copenhagen summit. It's called Soil Not Oil. But I was already finding out that most emissions come from chemical agriculture and globalized trade in agriculture, in chemical commodities, and packaging, and processing, and destroying forests to grow commodities, like the destruction of the Amazon for GMO soya. At that time, the figure I had was 45%, but the figure now is 50%. So if you add every aspect of the food system, you realize that 50% of the climate problem is the same agriculture that's destroying our health, driving our farmers to suicide, creating cancer, destroying our oceans, killing the insects. Same agriculture, destroying our health. And the same agriculture that can give us health, can regenerate biodiversity, can also regenerate the climate. Let me just share some figures with you. So Dr. Ratan Lal is one of the world's top leading scientists in soil. And he has said that there are 2,700 gigatons of carbon stored in the soil, which is more than the atmosphere, which is only 848 gigatons. In the biomass, it's 575 gigatons, but the biomass becomes the soil. It's not that soil creates its own organic carbon. It's the plants that give the carbon to the soil. And it's the recycling of living carbon of the plants that makes soil carbon rich. This now is being proven to be the best way to heal the broken carbon and nitrogen cycles. In my understanding, climate change is a disruption of the carbon cycle. So you're only emitting from fossil fuels, and you've left no capacity to draw down because you've killed the biodiversity and you're not doing organic farming. And of course, nitrogen fertilizers are emitting nitrous oxide. When you do organic farming with biodiversity, you are drawing down the carbon from the atmosphere. You are drawing down the nitrogen through nitrogen fixing plants, through the soil organisms. And, the Rodale Institute is showing we could sequester 17.5 gigatons annually. Meta-analysis of 224 trials, 17 gigatons. You just look through all the studies. Max Muller, those similar figures. But the best is a university in California, where they realize soil microorganisms make the soil. And the more the fungi in the soil, the more the decomposition in the soil. And Dr. Johnson has found that when you increase enough soil organisms and allow the soil fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi, to perform its role, you increase photosynthesis fivefold. But increased photosynthesis is more food production. And these are the links that are not being made. This is a very recent study. I want to bring you back to the issue of economies of permanence in the remaining time I have. So in 1981, I found that all of the land around Bangalore, I used to then be in the Institute of Science first and then in the Institute of Management at Bangalore. I found the land was going under eucalyptus and I wondered why. And then I found the World Bank had given a loan so the pulp industry could get more pulp. But what they were displacing was this amazing, amazing plant called, the Pongamia, you call it the Puna. Yeah? Now, I planted this in our garden here in Dehradun. And this 6 feet growth is in 1 month since the lockdown. Since I'm locked down, I'm watching every day how the branch is growing. Every day, this bit has grown since yesterday. This is yesterday's growth. This is the power that we ignore. when we ignore photosynthesis, when we ignore light. Now, in each of these leaves is not only the power of photosynthesis, yeah, the power of taking the sunlight through photosynthesis, absorbing the carbon dioxide, giving us the oxygen to breathe. You know, most of my country's deaths in COVID have been for lack of oxygen. We shouldn't take oxygen for granted. But it's not just the oxygen it gives us, then it gives us all the carbohydrates that give us the fiber, that gives us the food, that gives us everything. But most importantly, this particular tree is not just a fertilizer tree, it's a pest control tree. It's a natural pesticide. Now, can you imagine if every farmer on his field buns was growing the pongam? Every month he'd have this much in every branch. And I just counted 1,000 branches on our tree. And if you had 10 trees, please do the calculations how much ecological fertilizer you would have. And these trees, you know, our farm trees were brilliant because you pollard them, you don't kill the tree. You pollard and it comes right back. I told you, this is 1 month's growth. And the other, which I was introduced to, actually, I've been introduced to it from childhood because my mother used to use neem leaves in our silk and our woolens, and we used to have big bins of wheat, and she used to put neem leaves into the wheat bins. And I think you call it the kohomba, the neem. In our mountains, we don't have the neem. The neem is Azadirachta indica. We have its cousin, Melia azadirachta. This is the Melia. Now, of course, I'd known this, and I knew it's a pest control agent. And so when the Bhopal disaster took place, I carried bucket loads of neem. Those days, the soil was not paved over in Delhi, and the avenues used to have these wonderful neem trees. And below the avenues, the neem would fall, and these saplings would come up. I collected all the saplings and got into the train with a bucket full of neem saplings. And the coolie was laughing at me. He says, "Why are you taking this?" I said, "They've just died because of a pesticide leak, and I want them to grow neem." And I started a campaign in 1984, grow more neem, no more bipals. 10 years later, I find it's patented, 94, by US government and a timber merchant who's traveling in India and finding the women putting neem in the grain. And so, "Why are you doing it?" And they said, "It controls pests." Smart enough guy, he runs to the universities. "Do you work on neem?" Went to Pune University, found, yes, there were scientists. And again, Gandhi is the one who created this, the departments to study neem in Banaras Hindu University, in Pune University. He just collected the papers, went and wrote a patent application. And with the government, the Grace Company took patents on our neem. From 94 to 2005, I fought this patent of biopiracy. I call it biopiracy. I've written lots of books on this, including a new book called Origin, where I've taken, 9,000 patents in America on our medicinal plants, which weren't invented there. The basmati of Dehradun, the wheat, and the neem. So we need to do far more. Like we shifted from yield per acre to nutrition and health per acre, we need to start looking at our farms as sources of their pest control through integrated pest management, through biodiversity of plants, but also through botanical pesticides. We have so many books, I'll show you this one I wrote. This is the book we prepared for the patent challenge. And I'll show you, these are the signatures. I collected signatures for 100,000 farmers to take them to the European Patent Office. And we filed the case in the name of 100,000 Indian farmers to say, not only did you destroy our farming, you now want to steal what remains. We will not allow this biopiracy theft. It took 11 years, but we won. And I feel proud to say that, it was a very big chemical company that had destroyed the water in Massachusetts. There's a film made on them called A Civil Action, and the US government jointly. And we joined hands and defeated their patent claim. Just like you are joining hands and making a prosperous Sri Lanka. So to make a prosperous Sri Lanka, not only do we need to shift our mindset about where does fertility come from? Where do pests come from? Where does pest control come from? But we need to shift our economics paradigm. Colonialism created a paradigm of extraction. What did they make? They just loaded what we had, our spices, our textiles, our indigo, and took it. And then they collected the rent, the lagan. So their economy is extraction and extractivist commerce. Our economy is recycling. Our economy is regeneration. Our economy is knowing that we must give back to the earth. I'm working with our peasant women now to document every festival, because behind every festival is a regeneration of seed. Behind every festival is regeneration of soil. Behind every festival is a regeneration of biodiversity. Just had Akti, which is a festival for the new season of agriculture. And I asked my colleagues, I said, find out what we say. And the two prayers that touched me so deeply, one was, we must be loving friends to all life on earth. And that friendship with life on earth is the ultimate purpose of life. Being one earth family, being one of us there, Kutumbakam, is the purpose of life. Of course, it will give you wealth. Our research is showing that farmers doing chemical refarming and not getting exploited in the market are earning 10 times more. We have, just like we did health per acre, we did a report called wealth per acre. And we measured not just the externalities of the chemical system, we also measured the true economy, the true cost economy of our ecological systems. And what we have found is that $1.3 trillion every year is the harm to farmers and to the environment because of chemicals in farming. Add the subsidies, add all of this, that's a lot of harm. 1.3, that's nearly equal to our GDP. And then you add to it the harm to health, which hasn't been calculated, but COVID should wake us up to how costly the harm to health is. Every day on Indian TV, people come up and say, we are in 10 lakh debt, we are in 20 lakh debt, and our relative died. I want to quickly read out to you the figures of the global cost of the health damage because of an industrial chemical food system. Cancer, 2.5 trillion, diabetes, 2.5 trillion, endocrine disruption, 5.49 trillion, AMR infections, 1 trillion, obesity, 1.2 trillion, birth defects, 22.9 billion, autism, 171 billion, neurodegenerative diseases, 2.4 trillion. We are talking about an economy of harm and externalities that is bigger than the economy that is actually counted. And when you are shifting to 100% organic Sri Lanka, you are turning to an economy of permanence. You are turning to an economy of prosperity for all beings, because prosperity for all beings means we shouldn't be driving species to extinction. We should not be destabilizing climate and causing climate change. And because you've taken this very bold step, I want to mention just two other things that will need to be addressed in the coming years. So I've done a lot of books recently on dear Mr. Bill Gates, who stood there in the Paris summit telling the governments what to do. And I said, since when did the billionaire become more powerful than elected governments? Something's gone wrong. And so I studied him, and I wrote a book called Oneness versus 1% with my son, who's a genius in finding out facts that are hidden underground in many places. And we found out how the current billionaires have made their money. But we also found out that asset management funds, the BlackRocks and the Vanguards, actually own all the corporations, and therefore they drive them to make more money. For them, the end of life, the purpose of life is make more money at any cost. For us, the purpose of life has to be, yes, make money, but through taking care of life on earth. And we will make money. It's not that we won't, but we will make honest money. We will make non-violent money. So Bill Gates has come up with this new term called net zero. He says, we won't bring our emissions to zero. which is what the original treaty of UN climate change was. We will do net zero. We'll continue to pollute. I'll keep flying in my private jets. But we will lock the rest of the world into new certification systems to be our carbon sinks. And that's the reason he's buying large amounts of land. He's the biggest landlord in America. And I will send you the details about these new certification systems. Please work with other friendly governments to create systems of autonomous knowledge for the regeneration of this planet through a chemical-free farming that solves the climate problem, that solves the extinction problem and the biodiversity loss problem, that solves the health pandemic and health emergency, that solves the hunger and poverty problem, that solves the problem of unemployment, but more importantly, that solves the problem of alienation. I want to conclude by just remembering the teachings of Buddha. Health is the greatest gift. Contentment is the greatest wealth. Faithfulness is the best relationship. And the earth today is inviting us to be faithful to her laws, to her cycles, respecting her limits. And that faithfulness will generate an economy of permanence and prosperity and well-being for all. And if there's one country that can do it, I know it is you, Sri Lanka. Thank you.